My name is Nora Halstead. I'm 36. And the morning my sister called to tell me our father was dead, he was sitting at my kitchen table with a screwdriver, taking my toaster apart because he said it was browning unevenly. 5:40 in the morning. I put the call on speaker and set the phone between the coffee and the toaster springs. Dad passed last night. Charlene said it flat, the way you'd read a meter. He left everything to me and Kirk. You get nothing. Behind her, my brother-in-law leaned close enough to be heard. Took long enough. My father set the screwdriver down. He leaned toward that phone and said something. Quiet, level, finished. I'm not going to repeat it yet, because Charlene didn't hear it that morning. You'll hear it exactly where she finally did. Here's what none of them knew. There was a funeral that Sunday. It was real. There was a casket. There were flowers. And there was a widow crying in the front row. It just wasn't ours. And in my father's shirt pocket, folded in quarters, was a pawn ticket for $40. Welcome back, where the quiet ones finally get loud with dignity. If you've ever been underestimated at your own kitchen table, tell me where you're listening from and subscribe. You'll want to be here when this lands. 7 months earlier, my biggest problem was a night shift schedule. My father is Walter Halstead, Walt, 76 that fall, Army, 1969 to 1973. Then 34 years as a lineman for the Jasper County REMC out of Rensselaer, Indiana, which is a polite way of saying that when the ice came down, my father went up. He retired in 2009 and moved nowhere. The same house on Bunker Hill Road he and my mother bought in 1983, paid off in 2007. He wasn't rich. I was paid off rich. Small-town rich, the kind that never shows in a man's boots and shows up in a courthouse. An ice storm comes through the county at 2 in the morning. A line comes down, a house full of people goes dark and cold. Somebody has to climb. My father climbed. In 2006, at 56, he climbed 19 hours straight, came home with frostbite on 2 fingers, and slept in his boots. He spent 34 years putting the lights back on for people who never learned his name. My mother, Ruth, died in the spring of 2022, and my father grieved the way he worked, quietly, daily, without asking anybody to watch. Every evening at dusk, he went out and turned on the porch light. Ruth started it, back when my sister and I were teenagers and she'd wait up for headlights. She used to say a dark porch means nobody's coming home. After she died, he kept doing it, for a house with 1 person left in it. I used to think that was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. I was wrong. I found that out later. Now about me. Honestly, I've had 2 years to build a version where I come out clean. I'm not handing you that version. I'm a nurse. 6 years in hospice. I sat with people while they died. I held hands. I read out loud. I learned when to stop talking. Best work I've ever done. It paid $48,000 a year, and I owed $41,000 in nursing school loans. So I quit. Travel ICU. 13 weeks in Toledo, 13 in Amarillo, 13 wherever the money was. Nearly double the pay. I traded the job where you sit with people for the job where you fix them and leave. Remember that. It matters later. On a bright afternoon that October, my father climbed onto his own porch roof to clean the gutters, because asking for help was never going to be his best event. He fell 11 feet. Broken right wrist, the bad kind, a plate, 4 screws, 6 to 8 weeks, not a tragedy. An inconvenience with hardware in it. Mid-contract in Ohio. I made it to the hospital within 40 hours, because that's what you do. Charlene was already there with flowers, and her tears were arranged about as carefully as the flowers were. Kirk was in the hallway shaking the surgeon's hand with both of his, the way a man does when he's closing on something. Kirk sells insurance, annuities, mostly, Medicare supplements, a voice like warm syrup and a handshake he's practiced. "You go on back to your patients, Nora," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "Family takes care of family." At the time, it sounded like kindness. It took me 7 months to hear it for what it was, a man handing himself the keys. I did ask questions. Discharge planning is my native language. I asked for the medication list and the follow-up schedule. Kirk smiled and said it was handled, all of it, all files, all back at the house. And my father, floating on whatever they'd given him, lifted his good hand and gave me a thumbs up. "Go on, kiddo," he said. "I'm surrounded by professionals." So I flew back to Ohio. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because the two people standing closest to him kept telling me it was handled, and one of them had already decided exactly how to handle it. He moved into Charlene and Kirk's place in November, 15 minutes from his own house. Just a few weeks, they said. Here's where the first piece of paper showed up, the honest one. His right hand was in a cast to the knuckles. He couldn't write a check or drive, so Kirk brought a notary, and my father signed a limited power of attorney, left-handed. Bill paying only, utilities, property tax. Hear me clearly, because this is where people get it wrong. That document was legal, reasonable, boring. Your own mother would have signed one. That's what makes it work. It never starts with a crime. It starts with a favor. Charlene posted a photo that week. Dad at her kitchen table, soup in front of him, cast on a dish towel, caption, "Blessed to care for my daddy. Family is everything." 300 likes by Sunday. I liked it too. I tapped the little heart from an apartment in Toledo, because from 4 hours away it looked exactly like love. Then, on a Sunday call, Kirk referred to the house on Bunker Hill Road, the one my parents paid off with 34 years of ice storms, as the equity. "The way you'd mention weather," I said. "You mean the house?" He laughed. "Occupational hazard. Sorry." Then the wall went up, one polite brick at a time. My Sunday calls started landing on Charlene. "He's napping. He's tired. Hun, rough night. I'll tell him you called." 3 weeks straight, I did not hear my father's voice. His flip phone broke. That's what I was told. So I bought him a smartphone, put my number under "daughter" in capital letters, and shipped it. The package went missing. I shipped a second with signature tracking. "Delivered," said the email. "Signed for." "Oh, that," Charlene said. "Dad didn't want it. You know how he is with technology." My father rewired his own garage the year he turned 68. He is not afraid of a telephone. So I did the thing every one of you is about to tell me I should have done. I called the Rensselaer police and requested a welfare check on Walter Halstead, 76. I gave my nursing license number and told them I hadn't spoken to him in 3 weeks. They went, 2 officers, Thursday afternoon, daylight. Charlene met them at the door and offered coffee. My father was in the recliner in a clean shirt, television on. He looked up and smiled. "I'm fine, officers. Thank you for stopping." The report read, "No signs of neglect or distress. Subject alert and oriented, no further action." Because he was fine, in that chair, with 2 uniforms in the room. He was fine. Nobody hit him. Nobody starved him. What was being done to my father left no mark. And the system looks for marks? Kirk called that night at 8:40. The syrup was intact. That's what I remember. Not 1 degree colder. "Heard you sent the police by," he said. "I'm not met Nora. You were worried. That's a good thing. But you saw for yourself. He's fine. Next time just call me. Those boys are busy." And then, soft as a door closing, "Sleep tight, sis." He never threatened me, not once in 7 months. He used the system built to protect people to manufacture a paper saying he was innocent, and in the same call turned me into the relative who overreacts. After that, I second-guessed myself for 6 weeks. That was the point. I flew home for Christmas anyway. The cast was off, but something else had been fitted onto him. A smallness. His chair had been moved to the corner, behind the tree, where you turn your whole body to join a conversation. Charlene answered questions aimed at him. "Dad, how's the wrist? It's healing great, isn't it? Daddy?" And his coffee was decaf. "Doctor's orders," she said. I called his orthopedist in January. No doctor of his had ever said a word about caffeine. I got him alone on the back porch, both of us pretending we needed air in 28 degrees. He looked at me with the old spark. "My checkbook's been on a diet, kiddo." I asked what he meant. Statements used to come to Bunker Hill Road. Now everything was paperless and the passwords lived with Kirk. He'd asked to see the accounts twice. Both times, "That's what you've got me for." I went back inside and asked Charlene if the 3 of us could sit down after the holidays and go through Dad's finances. Kirk materialized like he'd been summoned. Family doesn't need lawyers, Nora, unless somebody's accusing somebody. Notice the move. I asked about statements. He introduced the word lawyers. Then Charlene started crying, right on schedule, about how nobody appreciates the one who stayed. And my father, because decent men make soft hostages, patted my arm. "Don't start a war at Christmas." I drove out to Bunker Hill Road that night before my flight, to check the gutters. I told myself. The porch light was off. I sat in the road with the engine running and looked at that dark house. In 36 years, I had never seen it off. Not the winter. Mom was dying. If your parents are over 70, do something for me. This week. When was the last time you heard their voice? Directly. Not through anybody. On January 6th, I signed another 13-week contract. Let me give you the numbers, because this is where people get vague. And vague is how you make yourself look better. Ohio again. 13 weeks. Break it early, and I owed $9,400, housing clawback plus recruiting fee. I had $38,000 left on my loans. Rent was covered as long as I stayed. So the math said stay. The math always says stay. That's the whole trick of it. I've signed a lot of paperwork in my life. That was the most expensive signature you'll hear about tonight. By February, the Sunday calls had gone from screened to scripted. I took 4 days between rotations, told nobody, flew into Indianapolis and drove north, my little ambush of love. Charlene opened the door and her face did something I had never seen it do. It reset. "Oh, honey, you just missed him. He's at a fish fry with the Post Boys." Fish fry. February, Indiana. I said I'd wait. She said they'd be hours. And I wasn't tired. I drove out to Bunker Hill Road. The grass was knee-high under a crust of ice, my father's grass, edged by hand every July because a machine couldn't get it square. The mailbox was stuffed so full the door wouldn't shut. A house holding its breath. And the porch light was off in the afternoon, which meant nothing and everything, because nobody had come out at dusk to turn it on in a long time. I stopped for gas on the way out of town and ran into Dale Rutkowski. Dale is 78. He ran the funeral home for 40 years before his sons took over, and he's been commander of Post 1170 since I was in high school. He buried half this county and cried at most of it. He looked at me the way you look at a math problem. Walt hasn't been to a post meeting since November, honey. We figured he moved in with you. I said no. He was at the fish fry today. Dale's face went still. There's no fish fry. Nora, there hasn't been one since Ray Kirsch got sick. Ray Kirsch. Remember that name? I didn't. It went past me like a car on the highway. I called Charlene from the gas station lot. She didn't pause, not 1 second. It's not the post crowd, it's his other buddies. You don't know them. Rensselaer has about 5,900 people. My father was born there and climbed poles for the co-op for 34 years, which means he put the lights back on for most of them, in a town that size. His other buddies is not a sentence that survives contact with reality. Here's what nobody tells you. I couldn't prove it. I could only feel it. Feelings don't open doors. I flew back to Ohio with my stomach in a knot. 3 days later, Charlene texted a photo. Dad in the armchair, thin smile, hands in his lap. He's doing great. Stop checking up on us. I stared at it a long time. There was something in that picture, small, ordinary, right in the frame, that I wouldn't understand for 3 more months. When I did, it changed how I saw every photo she ever sent me. Then I called Bernice Kowalczyk. Bernice is 79 and has lived across the road since 1985. Nothing ever happened on that road that Bernice didn't know first. I asked her, gently, if she'd noticed anything. Then she said the thing I still hear in my sleep. I did stop by, sweetheart, twice. Charlene said he's getting forgetful, and the doctor said visitors set him off. So I stopped stopping by. That's the weapon, right there. Not a locked door, not a threat, just a rumor, planted in the kindest voices in town, that a proud man's mind was going. Once it exists, everybody who loves him stays away to be good to him. They isolate him for you. For free. Bernice was crying by the end of that call, 79 years old, and she was apologizing to me. My contract ended the last week of April. I got back to Toledo, planning to drive to Rensselaer, and refused to leave without seeing him. The phone rang before I'd unpacked. Paulette Reyes, Polly, an LPN. I'd worked med-surg with a lifetime ago. She'd taken a job at a care facility out past Goodland. Her voice was careful, the way we're trained to be. Nora, we've got a resident here since March. He asks every nurse on every shift if they know a nurse named Nora, says she's his daughter. I could not speak. He doesn't like a placement, honey, she said. He presents like somebody misplaced him. I stood in the middle of my kitchen with my keys still in my hand. Nobody had said the words nursing home to me. Not once. Not in any call or text. As far as I'd been told, my father was eating pot roast 15 minutes from his own front door. Before I tell you what was inside that building, let me say this to everyone with an aging parent. Ask the hard question early, while it's still a boring question. And if this is landing close to home, subscribe, because what my father did next deserves witnesses, and you'll want to be one. 3 hours of highway. I spent every mile of it being a nurse, because being a daughter would have put me in a ditch. Fallowfield Manor sits off a county road behind a sign with 2 letters burned out. The smell hit first, cheap disinfectant laid over something older it was losing to, a call light blinking down the east hall with nobody moving toward it. I counted staff the way I have on every unit I ever walked into. 1 aide for a wing that needed 4. Not to shame her. She was maybe 23 and she was moving. Understaffed people can't pour from an empty building. I say it because my father lived inside it 10 weeks, while my sister posted about family being everything. He was in a shared room at the end of the East Hall. Second bed, by a window that didn't open. The first bed belonged to Emmett Doyle, 83. 4 years in that room. I checked the visitor log later. The last name in it belonged to a hospice chaplain. At night, Emmett hollered at the ceiling. My father explained it the way he'd explain a fault on a line. "It took me 3 nights to understand it," he said. "He's not confused. He hollers because it's the only way anybody comes into the room. He's paying attention with his dignity." Then, 4th night, I hollered back. Not to be funny, so he'd know somebody heard it. My father had lost 18 pounds. Walter Halstead, who once carried a cable spool up a hill on his shoulder out of pure stubbornness, was gray at the jaw, in a shirt I didn't recognize that fit him like a borrowed apology, but his eyes came up when the door opened, and his eyes were his eyes, sharp, whole, present. He looked at me for a long second, and what he said first broke me worse than crying would have. "Took you long enough, kiddo. They told me you knew. Tell me you signed off on it." Hear that carefully. It took me a minute. They hadn't just hidden him from me, they'd hidden me from him. And they had told each of us that the other one had agreed to all of it. I did what I do. The date, the month, the president, count backward from 100 by 7s, just to watch him roll his eyes. He got to 65 before he quit. "It's Tuesday. I'm in purgatory. And your quiz is easier than one of Kirk's annuity pitches." There was nothing wrong with my father's mind. Nothing. And that fact was about to matter more than anything else in this story. Then he told me about April. Sit still for this. This is what I didn't understand about being old, until my father explained it in a shared room off a county road. I walked out to that gate in April. Kiddo, nobody stopped me. Nobody had to. No wallet. No phone. No truck. I remember the REMC dispatch number from 1985. I remember my service number. I remember what gas cost the day I bought the truck. I stood at that gate 20 minutes, and I could not remember your telephone number. I stood in that room and could not swallow. 20 years I pushed one button, he said. The button with your face on it. I went back inside, not because they locked me in, because I didn't know where to go. I walked to the front office with my license number ready and my nurse voice. The administrator was a tired man in an oatmeal-colored tie, reciting the script he'd been handed. Only the responsible party could authorize a transfer. That was Mr. Kirk Doss, who held power of attorney. I asked one question. "Does Mr. Halstead have a diagnosis of cognitive impairment on file, dementia, incapacity, anything?" Silence, while he clicked. There wasn't one, because none exists. He was admitted as a voluntary placement, on paperwork from his POA, with a vague letter about needing support with daily living. A competent adult is not a package in storage. He can discharge himself. The administrator called Kirk and put him on speaker, which I'll thank him for until I die. Kirk said kidnapping. Kirk said elder endangerment. Kirk said he'd have my license. I let him finish. Then I called the state long-term care ombudsman from that same desk. She called back in 40 minutes. The administrator put her on speaker too. "Mr. Halstead has no adjudication of incapacity," she said. "If you hold him, that's false imprisonment. I'm logging this call at 11:14. It's remarkable how fast paperwork appears when somebody offers to read it with a state official. 20 minutes later, my father signed his own discharge. Right-handed, healed, unhurried, the W leaning left the way it has since 1969. "First thing I've signed in 6 months," he said to the room. "And it's a jailbreak." Polly hugged him at the door and tucked a sleeve of crackers into his jacket like contraband. We got as far as the hallway. Then my father stopped, one hand flat on the wall. He turned and walked back into that room and said something to Emmett Doyle that I could not hear from where I stood. I didn't ask him. Not in the car, not that week, not ever. There are things a man says that aren't yours to collect. 40 miles outside Fort Wayne. My father put his hand flat on the dashboard. "Kiddo, my chest is doing something stupid." Atrial fibrillation, rate of 160, not a heart attack, an electrical problem, an irony he'd have enjoyed if he'd been in any shape to. I had him in the emergency department by 9:40. Here's the part I still can't explain. I have been an ICU nurse for 12 years. I have run codes. I have told 40 families the worst sentence of their lives in a voice that didn't shake. I stood outside my father's door and I could not read the monitor. The numbers were just shapes. A resident half my age said they'd try to convert him chemically, and I nodded like a relative, because that's all I was. He converted at 3:50 in the morning. Sinus rhythm, pressure up. A nurse came out and said the 4 words that reorganize your whole body. He's asking for you. He was pale and hooked on 6 things. And the first thing he said wasn't about his heart. "Don't tell anybody I'm here." "Kiddo, not yet." I asked why. He said Kirk had spent an hour threatening to have me arrested, and he wanted a day to think before anybody knew where he was. So I did something any patient can do and nobody knows about. I told the registrar he wanted out of the facility directory. It's a box on a form, 11 seconds. It means anyone calling that hospital for Walter Halstead is told, truthfully, that they cannot confirm or deny anyone by that name is a patient. Remember that box? They kept him for 2 nights. Then I brought him to my apartment, pulled out the couch, and made real coffee. Caffeinated, doctor's orders be damned. On the second morning, at my kitchen table, my father took the whole thing apart. I was talking. A lot. Building a case. Who we'd sue. In what order? Which agency first? How fast? He set his cup down. "You want to know if I'm mad at your sister? I didn't ask that." "I'm asking for it. I am." He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table, the way he does. "But you want the true thing?" "I waited for you. Every Saturday." I counted 31. I had a defense ready. I'd carried it 3 hours down US 24. The contract, the clawback, the loans, the rent, the math that always says, stay. I didn't say one word of it. Sitting at that table, I understood what a defense is. It's a lie with better organization. Here's the truth, and I've had 2 years to soften it. I'm not going to. I left hospice because sitting with people doesn't pay. Then I sent money instead of showing up, and I called it love. My sister stole from him. I just wasn't there. I have thought about which one of those is worse for 2 years, and I'm not going to pretend I've settled it. He wouldn't let me apologize. "We're done with secrets in this family," he said. "Both directions." Then he asked me to drive him to the bank. Here's a thing people don't know. A power of attorney doesn't take away your rights. He was still the account holder of record, and an account holder is entitled to his own statements. He walked in, showed his license, and asked for 6 months, 14 pages. He read them the way he read a burn pattern on a scorched panel. Slow, twice. He never cursed once. From November through early April, $204,000 left my father's accounts. 31,000 labeled care expenses. Fallowfield takes Medicaid. His actual share of cost ran about $2,100 a month. $12,600 of care, billed at 31. 96,000 wired to DOS Legacy Planning, LLC. 61,000 into an annuity. Stop on that one. It tells you exactly who Kirk is. He sold my 76-year-old father a 9-year annuity. Do the arithmetic. It matures when he's 85. 8% surrender charge if he touched it early. The beneficiaries were Kirk and my sister. Kirk's commission was $6,700. Paid the week it cleared. $16,000 remained. Stapled behind the statements, a courtesy copy of something worse. A home equity line of credit against the Bunker Hill Roadhouse. $165,000. Pending. Signed Walter Halstead. April 9th. On April 9th, my father was 100 miles away. Asking nurses if anybody knew his daughter. We drove to the house that afternoon. Somebody had been through the den. File drawers open, picked over. My mother's suitcase sat unzipped on the guest bed. Her good jewelry box empty beside it. Not quite empty, one thing left in it. Folded into quarters. A pawn ticket. My father's climbing hooks. The gaffs he wore up poles for 34 years. Oiled every November. Promised to the display case at post 1170. $40. I had just read a $204,000 statement without blinking. The $40 ticket is what made him sit down. He said nothing. He folded it again, put it in his shirt pocket, buttoned the flap. That night, he stood in my kitchen for a long minute, hands in his pockets, looking at nothing. Then he said, "That thing's browning uneven." And he got a screwdriver from my junk drawer and started taking my toaster apart. Harriet Pell, 64, elder law, out of an office that smells like toner and lemon drops. Handshake like a filing cabinet closing. She listened without moving, then took off her glasses. "Documents don't cry, Mr. Halstead. That's why I like them." My father fell professionally in love. Everything she did was legal. Hear the order? It's the part that protects people. 1. A notarized revocation of every power of attorney, delivered to his bank, the county recorder, and every institution he ever touched. 2. A signature dispute letter froze the home equity application where it stood. No money had moved. The house was still clean. 3. A report to Adult Protective Services. 4. A fraud affidavit at the bank. I made the APS call myself. I'm a licensed nurse. I'm a mandated reporter. I didn't get to choose silence. If I'd sat on this, I'd have lost my license, and I'd have deserved to. Here's what the system said. APS, 6 to 18 months. Ma'am, we're short-staffed. The sheriff, if he's competent and the money moved through an authorized instrument. This is civil. Our file is roughly 400th in line. Nothing moves it up, unless something happens that can't be filed away. Then the bank produced what we didn't have, a second power of attorney, full financial authority, notarized January 8th, the one my father never signed. I had his medical records by then. On January 8th, he was at the VA clinic in Marion from 8:40 to 11:15 having a cardiac stress test, initiated at every stage. The notary stamp says it was executed at 10:05 that same morning, at an office 40 miles away. A man cannot be on a treadmill in one town and singing in another. The paper didn't just lie. The paper told itself. Then Harriet slid the will across, dated December 18th. Smart date. In December, he was living in their house with a healing wrist, signing things, no gap to point at. She went down it line by line, then stopped. It leaves him your climbing hooks. My father went very still. Every man at post 1170 knew where those hooks belonged. He'd said so at a meeting in 2019, and Dale wrote it in the minutes. He pawned them, my father said, very quietly. Then he wrote himself a paper, leaving them to him. Fraud in a drawer is a lawsuit. Fraud performed in public is a conviction. Then, understand me, I will not participate in a deception. I'll bring the real documents wherever you happen to be standing. That is all I'm offering. Kirk's answer came Thursday, an emergency guardianship petition, hearing Monday morning. My father was confused, declining, manipulated by a daughter after his money. Accuse the other side of the exact crime in your own pocket. And a voicemail for me, kidnapping, with a case number he'd invented. Harriet was serene. Guardianship needs an independent medical evaluation. Your father will pass it like a driving test. But it buys them time, and time is the only thing they actually need. This is the part people get wrong. Nobody lied, not once. Watch each link. Link 1, Fallowfield, mailed the certified discharge notice to the responsible party on file. Kirk got it. Friday, it said, correctly, that Walter Halstead was no longer a resident. Link 2, he is called Fallowfield. Polly said the only thing she's allowed to say about a discharged resident, Mr. Halstead is no longer with us here. Link 3, he called hospitals, Fort Wayne, Lafayette, Logansport. Everyone gave the same sentence. We cannot confirm or deny anyone by that name is a patient. Link 4, Dale called Thursday evening. Friendly as church, post 1170 was holding a memorial gathering Sunday at 2, and the family was welcome to say a few words. Every one of those statements was true. I asked Harriet whether staying quiet was the same as lying. She thought longer than I wanted. Legally, silence isn't fraud, but I'd like you to be able to live in your own head afterward. And that's a different bar. Decide it now, not Sunday. I asked my father the same. He answered a different question. They didn't take my money. Kiddo, money I built once with my hands. I can build again smaller. 34 years I climbed poles in ice storms so somebody I never met could keep a light on. I never once asked who they were. They put my lights out and told the whole town I asked them to. Told my own girl I didn't want her. Told me my own mind wasn't safe to be in. At 76, a man's say is the last thing he owns outright. I'm taking mine back where they spent it. 2 days later, we found the safe deposit box, opened 1991. $38 a year, too small for anyone to notice. Inside, his discharge papers, the deed, his medals in a handkerchief. An envelope soft with handling. In my mother's round hand. For Walt. When I can't say it myself. He read it at the window with his back to me. When he came back, he gave me one line. Don't let the quiet ones fool you, and don't you go quiet yourself. Before I tell you about Sunday, answer me in the comments. Who holds your parents' power of attorney right now? And are you sure your parents know that? Saturday morning, my sister posted a black and white photograph of our father to Facebook. Rest easy. Daddy, your girl was with you till the end. 400 reactions by lunch, candles, hearts, casseroles pledged by women who knew my mother at church. With him till the end. The end of what? His checking account. I did what I should have done in February. I read every photograph she'd ever sent me like a chart instead of a daughter. 11 of them, going back to December. She'd been careful, different angles, poses. In one, he's holding a coffee cup. In one, he's looking away. They don't look staged. but he is wearing the same shirt in all 11. So I checked the file details. Any phone does it. 10 seconds, and nobody ever does. March 3rd, everyone. Inside 11 minutes. Then I saw what had been sitting in the corner of the February picture for 3 months. Behind him, through the window, out of focus. His own porch on Bunker Hill Road. The light was off. Every proof of life she ever sent me came from one afternoon. He'd been gone from that house since March. Her photographs never knew it. Bernice called me at 2, a truck in my father's driveway, a man on his knees at the back door with a drill, taking the locks out, Saturday, before any funeral, changing the locks on a dead man's house before they'd buried him. I called Harriet, who logged the time in a file, getting thick enough to stand on its own. Then Bernice, 79 years old, added, I told him he was on the wrong property. He said he had authorization. I said I've had a key since 2009, and I've never once needed authorization. That evening, my father took my mother's letter from his pocket and handed it to me, open to the second page. He'd never shown me the second page. She wrote it in 2021, a year before she died. Charlene has come to me for money 3 times. I gave it 3 times. I never told your father, because I thought if he didn't know, she was still his girl. I was wrong. I didn't save her. I only bought her time to keep becoming what she's becoming. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm asking you not to be surprised. I read it twice. Then stood in the hallway. Here's what that page does. It moves the beginning. The lying didn't start with Kirk, not with a power of attorney or an annuity or a practiced handshake. It started years earlier, with a mother who loved her daughter enough to cover for her, called that love, and was wrong. My father had lived 3 years beside that secret without knowing it was in the house. This is not a defense of my sister. Nothing on that page excuses $1. My mother only made the room where it could grow. Then she died, and Charlene walked into a house with nobody left to say no. Saturday, near midnight. The whole thing laid out on my kitchen table. I made one last run at him. We could drop it. Monday morning, police station, the whole file. No hall, no town watching. He wasn't sharp about it, almost gentle. Monday morning, there's a hearing to declare me unfit, and a closing to put $165,000 against my wife's house. Monday is theirs. Kiddo. Sunday is mine. Then the part I hadn't understood until that second. And I'm not going there to catch him. I'm going because Ray Kirsch was my friend for 51 years, and I'm not missing it. We agreed on rules. His rules. No shouting, no accusations, no speeches. I'd carry the folder, statements, revocation, medical records, discharge papers, and let the paper do the talking. Paper had been their weapon from the first afternoon. There's a justice in being beaten by the real thing. Sunday, 1:40, post 1170, flags at the front, the brass honor board with 60 years of names, 60 folding chairs on an old wood floor that creaks confessions out of everybody. A photograph of Raymond Kirsch in uniform, 1961, cocky as sunrise, Verna Kirsch. His widow of 52 years, front row, purse in her lap. In the second row, a young woman in a black cardigan, 26, Tanya Brill, Ray's granddaughter. Her employer had approved her bereavement leave the week before and never asked whose funeral. My father came in the front door at 1:42, good dark suit, VFW cap on, and took the last row. He'd come to pay respects to his friend, and that is what he did. Emmett Doyle sat beside him. Dad had signed him out of Fallowfield for the afternoon. He wore a borrowed suit of Dale's, 2 sizes too big, and was so pleased to be in a room with people that he shook hands with a coat rack. Kirk and Charlene came in at 1:55. New shoes. A black dress with the store creases still in it. A folder under Kirk's arm. They walked up the center aisle and sat down next to Verna Kirsch, a woman they had never met. At 2 o'clock, Dale stepped to the podium, cleared his throat with ceremony, and said, "Before we share our memories, the family's asked to say a few words." And Kirk stood up. Kirk took the podium. Walt was family, and family honors a man's wishes. Nobody reads a will at a memorial. He had a hearing Monday morning and a closing that afternoon, and needed 60 witnesses. He wasn't grieving. He was campaigning, house, accounts, truck, all to Charlene and him. Then, and to his daughter Nora, nothing. For reasons she understands, he smiled reading it. Then, and to my brother-in-law Kirk, my climbing hooks, in appreciation. The room made a sound that wasn't words. 5th row, those hooks are supposed to go in the case. Verna Kirsch stood up. "I'm sorry. Who is this man? This is Raymond's service." My father stood up in the back row. 20 minutes he'd been there, and Kirk never turned around. He didn't hurry. Walt Halstead never hurried for anybody, and wasn't starting for a funeral that wasn't his. Emmett Doyle clapped first. He tipped the mic down and poured coffee from a thermos labeled prune juice. "Dead men don't sign papers, son, and they sure as hell don't drink coffee." Kirk got loud. "He's not competent. He wandered off from a facility. She's manipulating him. That's what guardianship is for." The room went quiet, the way an audience does when it stops being an audience and becomes a jury. Harriet stood. "Mr. Doss, may I see the document you just read to this room?" In the voice of a weather report, the revocation, VA clinic records. January 8th, 8:40 to 11:15, a power of attorney. Notarized that morning at 10:05, 40 miles away. $204,000 in 6 months. The D stands for Doss, a home equity application signed April 9th while he sat in Fallowfield. A young woman stood up, her grandfather's funeral. "I notarized those." He said Mr. Halstead had signed at home already. He said it was routine. Everybody does it that way. Then, crying, "He gave me the week off. He never asked whose funeral." My father laid the pawn ticket beside it. "You wrote yourself a paper giving you my hooks, son. You'd already sold them, $40. I climbed with those 34 years. Bernice stood up. "Walt, I drove past your place. I saw the grass. I saw the mailbox." She stopped. "I told myself his kids had it handled." Everybody told themselves that. Bernice, 7 months. This whole town told itself that. That's the only reason I'm standing here. Then, how many of you drove past a yard like mine and said the same thing? 2 deputies came in. Nobody was cuffed. The kill shot was Harriet handing Kirk a litigation hold and a complaint filed with the state insurance board. He went white. He knew what it meant. The room didn't. Charlene dropped into the front row. For one moment, the actual woman looked out. "We were drowning. Daddy." Kirk said it was temporary. I believed her. That's the tragedy. Next breath. "But you made it worse. Nora, if you'd stayed out of it, nobody had to know." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "What did we do?" Just, we'd have gotten away with it if the nurse hadn't checked the chart. In my waiting room voice, "You called before sunrise to tell me I get nothing. I'm the only one leaving this room with everything I walked in with." In the parking lot, she turned and looked at our father instead of what he owned. "Sweetheart, I've been alive this whole time. You just stopped checking." That's what he'd said into a muted phone at 5:41 Friday morning. Saved 2 days for her face. The ledger, Kirk, 2 forgery counts, theft from an elderly person, falsifying a loan application, license revoked by fall, annuity rescinded, 148,000 of 204 recovered, the house untouched. Charlene. A plea, 3 years probation, restitution, 400 hours at a nursing home, emptying bedpans and reading to residents nobody visits. A judge drier than my father. Dad brought Emmett home from Fallowfield. He hollers less with people in the house. The pawnshop owner pulled the hooks from a drawer, not the case. I set them aside, didn't feel like something that ought to get sold. They're at post 1170 now. First thing my father did at home, before the suit came off, was turn on the porch light, a 40-watt bulb, the cheapest thing in the house. He looked at it as long as a man looks at a headstone. High and Dale started lights on, monthly at the post, free coffee, teaching people their age to read a power of attorney and spot a signature that's too pretty. 11 came the first month, the 11th Emmett, on coffee. By the 3rd, extra chairs, I took a staff position. Back in hospice, presence isn't a debt you clear, it's a habit. He's fixed the toaster, the disposal, both smoke detectors. He's circling my washing machine like a hawk over a field. I've stopped arguing. My father spent 34 years making sure strangers could keep a light on. It took one funeral that wasn't his to teach him to ask somebody to leave one on for him. If this reminded you to check your parents' paperwork, or your own, do it this week. So tell me in the comments, in your family, who's going to leave the light on for you? I read every one. Subscribe and share this.